Yes, so the next session will be a timely relevant doctoral education, and the moderator of this session is Eva. Eva is an open science coordinator in the National Library Technology of University of Chemistry and Technology in Prague. So thank you so much for moderating and welcome.
Yeah. Thank you very much for the invitation and good morning, everyone. I would like to introduce my panelists today, which we will talking about doctoral education, doctoral training, which is very, very important because it's the doctoral education. It's very important part in academia. It's shaping the progress towards the innovation and also the knowledge of the knowledge-based society. So it's very important for the future to face challenges that we are facing. And we know that the institution has these three roles. So it's to provide the education, research, but also the third role, it's to serve to the society. So be co-connection. So we will talk in this discussion. So we have 4 panelists. The first one is Alexandra Hesgel. Then we have, I will introduce them quickly. Then we have Associate Professor Maja Elmgren from Uppsala University. We have Nicola Dengov from Eurodoc, General Board Member, and we have also doctoral candidate Hanna Dort. She's a doctoral candidate from Sweden. Yeah. So now I would like to give the floor to Alexander with a perspective on timely and relevant doctoral education, what shape it, what is the perspective of institutions, because he is representing European University Association Council of Doctoral Education. So each speaker will have around 5 minutes to provide the perspective on the topic.
Great, thank you very much. So I have 5 minutes to respond all the questions related to doctorates in Europe. So I'm up to the challenge, and thank you for your kind introduction. And you said I need to show the perspective of universities, but of course I try to have also a more general view, also based on what's going on in Europe or in doctoral education now in the last years, and really based on what we are doing in OECD. So many of you know us probably. So we are the Council for Doctoral Education. We are part of the European University Association, which brings now in CD more than 270 universities together, particularly people involved also in doctoral schools. And we try really on one hand to work on mutual learning. And when we talk about doctoral education, we are always working within different poles. So on one hand, doctoral education or the doctorate, or when you do a doctorate, you're in a situation in between higher education, because you get a degree, and research, because that's what you're doing. When we look what is the outcome of the doctorate, it's also 2 things. On one hand is the research itself, so your thesis, but at the same time, it's also the doctoral candidate, him or herself. So if we call this an outcome, but a person who has gone through a journey becoming an independent scholar. When we look what we focus in the doctorate, it's also on one hand, it's the research itself, but we have increased also debates on transversal skills, what can this means. Then we are doctorates about producing future academics, but at the same time, the majority will not stay in academia. So also here a different pole. And then we're in a way where, as we just had here now, we talked about open science, so which is not a topic you can say, well, what is this related to doctoral education? But of course, it completely is, because whatever shapes the future of doctoral education is also shaping doctoral education. But at the same time, when you are doctoral candidates, you need to concentrate on your research. So what does this mean? And when I now want in the next 3 minutes, I guess, make a sign or throw me that ball to my head, and I will feel it. So I just want to bring some stuff into the room. So the first thing which remains important when we talk about the doctorate is, again, being aware what the base of doctoral education is. It's the research. And Of course, out of the doctorate, a lot of skills comes out, and this also includes what you can learn in a transversal skills training. But the basis is the research itself. So many skills out of the doctorate come by doing actually research and the knowledge coming in it. And this means what I already mentioned, the need to be aware what are the external drivers then that drive doctoral education, but also always think about this essence. The second, I think it's important to be aware of what a doctorate is. And the doctorate is something actually wonderful. And when I did my doctorate, I often feel it's a privilege, spend 3-4 years on doing something you really have a passion, you have a topic. This is for most people not possible, but we need also to acknowledge that there are many challenges while doing the doctorate. And as an institution, you can do a lot supporting doctoral candidates in this journey, and being aware about what can be done and what not can be done is also an important point. The third element when we talk about developing doctoral education is it's important to avoid a one-fits-it-all approach. We have a huge diversity in Europe between institutions, between disciplines, between doctoral candidates. For instance, just when we look into the generational issues, some do the doctorate with 25, others with 50. So we have it, so one-fits-it-all approach do not work. At the same time, it's important, especially when you are in a policy making on behalf of doctoral candidate, to understand the interconnectedness. Just because in your institution something sounds great, you're always in a bigger European context with a lot of mobility. So raising awareness, and this, I think, Eurodoc, it's a great forum for that, to understand what's going on in different points. Something, and I understand that it has already been discussed yesterday, is really the funding issue. So doctoral education has been evolved a lot in the last 20 years when it comes to providing service to doctoral candidates, but there is also challenges in many countries. For instance, when we look into the funding of salaries of doctoral candidates, which need to be approached. And of course, sometimes or in some contexts, there is a tendency to think, oh, there could be an easy fix, just have less doctoral candidates and then you have more money per doctoral candidate. But at the same time, we know society needs future researchers, and everybody who is able and who is interested to do research should have this opportunity. So, and this only works if we have more funding for universities, for doctoral candidates. And we are having now, for instance, the next framework project, program, and many other elements, which means, and here doctoral candidates can play a role to work also on their national level or also association to really transmit to the society, to policymakers, the importance of research, the importance of science, and also the important early stage researchers play. And so a role also in lobbying for stronger funding structure is really important, especially in a situation today. We are confronted with multiple crises in this world. So showing, well, it's important still to be aware of this is a point. Another, then I just will have 2 more points, is really to think about structures. So when we look in the last 20 years, there has been a big debate on introducing structures, introducing support within institution. This has been extremely important, but because I think when we look how complex the world nowadays is of research, we need the appropriate structure. At the same time, we really need to maintain what doctorate again is. It's the curiosity, it's the spontaneity. We need to we are in a situation where on one hand it's important to look what are the career opportunities, what are the current situations, but the doctorate is always looking into not the needs of today, also the needs of today, but also needs in 20 years, because who does a doctorate today will solve issues in 20 years, and the doctorate is a good base. And the last point, and this has to do also in the world we are, is academic freedom, a topic which is often seen for granted. But what we have seen in the last years in different parts of Europe, different contexts, the importance that we understand each other, that we are academic, and doctoral education is part of the academic endeavor. This includes academic freedom. It includes the way we will have our next annual meeting actually in a week on communication. So we are in a public discourse, and it's important to raise a voice. But it's also about being avoid too much steering by external stakeholders about what research can be done or not. Again, the future has a lot of challenges for all of us, and the doctorate is really the way where people spend some years to look into what are the questions of today, but also tomorrow. And with this, I probably spoke too long, but thanks.
Thank you to Alexandra. As he mentioned, the research is the key component in for doctoral education, and this affects also the education and the social engagement, because we need to translate it to make it implemented. Is there any quick question to Alexandra now? We will have then even discussion. No, so we can continue. So we have now Maya, the associated professor, and she's here also because she wrote about the doctoral education, the report, so she can provide us with the perspective of researchers.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me. Yes, you talked about changes in doctoral education, and changes has always been there. I mean, we have a really long history from the medieval time and to now, but even if we think about that as being a doctorate all the time, actually in the medieval time, it was the orator, the teacher of the truth, who could discuss the thesis from religion or maybe law or something like that. And it wasn't until in the middle of the 19th century when research, as you pointed out, that is sort of what we think is a doctorate. But not until then you wrote your own thesis. So from the medieval orator, the teacher of the truth, to the researcher of today, the creator of knowledge, that is a really big change. So we can also discuss what have we lost, because I think that in the individual perspective, we really want, of course, the doctoral students to do the research, to come out with a thesis. That is really, really important. And we also want them to know more things, to have a broader knowledge, not just know what they have done research on. But we also actually want them to be something else, to be more than they were when they get in. So sort of creating their identity, their academic identity. And if we have all these three parts, they can also in the future and also during the doctorate contribute to the research production, the capacity of the department or the discipline, and also the academic culture. And I think it is really important that we think about these three aspects and also how different sort of influences actually force us in different directions here. So, of course, doctoral education is really fundamental for academia. It has to do with the production and also the reproduction of knowledge. It serves as a gatekeeper. So if you haven't done your doctorate, you can't go on and continue in academia. And so that is really important. But it is, of course, really important also for the rest of the society. And that is something that academia has to take into account. What we can see during the last years or the last decades is a shift of power from academia to both politics and research funding agencies. So the research funding agencies, they want the research to be done, of course. They have a focus on that, sometimes a bit short-sighted. So they want the research results to come out right now. And that could also be important for also both for the doctoral students and for their supervisors, seniors in academics, because they need these results to actually be able to go further in the career. So you have a focus on the research results, and you have a project logic. You think about the project more. And then you have the politics, which might focus more on the competences, the role in the rest of the society, to be able to sort of contribute in companies, in politics, and so on. And there you have more of an educational logic. If you see the kind of criteria and so on that you try to focus on in Europe, not least, you have all these different things that you want the students to know, and skills that you want the students to acquire. And both of these have some sort of focus on secure results. They want results to come out, and they want that. And then you have academia, who earlier on had, and sometimes a problematic power towards doctoral students. But in the best sense, academia could focus on academic values and this identity formation, and for doctoral students to become scholars, to become these independent, not just researchers, but also thinkers and sort of critical people in society. In some part of the research that we have, when we have interviewed people who have been in grading committees, they talked about, oh, it would be good if we could sort of support the interesting failures and not just the secure results. And as you mentioned also, the academic freedom is something that the academia has to try to really focus on. So we have all these ongoing changes, and they have really consequences for academia, but also for the society. Because if academia does not take its responsibility for the formation of scholars, I think that it is impossible for politics to sort of, with rules and regulations and criteria, form this. We need to take responsibility on our own within academia. And this is, I would say, not just something for the individual supervisor to do, but you have probably heard that it takes a village to raise a child. And I would say that it also takes a collegium to actually help young researchers becoming scholars to grow and to develop in the best way. So I would like to see academia not going back to when professors had all the power to do whatever they wanted, but really for academia to step forward and to see what kind of responsibilities can we sort of have, and what can we do to make to be the third part in this change, and not just looking at the changes that comes from other parts of the society. Thanks.
Yeah, so thank you very much. As we could hear the responsibility of institution, but which means there are different actors within the university. So it's not just the leadership, but also supervisor and Erika's researcher or students should think how they can bring or contribute to this effort to improve the situation and all the challenges that we are facing. And there are different actors external that they have different influence, so we need to remain more neutral place. So is there any quick question right now? If not, we can go to the next speaker, which is Hannah, doctoral candidate. So she will provide the perspective from young researcher.
Can everyone hear me? Yes. Good morning. Again, my name is Hannah Dort, and I'm a representative from SFSDK, which is the Doctoral Student Committee of the Swedish National Union of Students. I am also a final year PhD student studying population genetics at Stockholm University's Department of Zoology. If you'd like to visit some very lovely concrete buildings, we're about 40 minutes down the road. You can't miss us. So I'm joining today's panel to share my experiences and opinions as a current PhD student in Sweden. So today I'm mostly just speaking from my heart rather than from any sort of published research. When I first saw the suggested questions for this session, I'll admit that I was a little bit overwhelmed. Depending on the field you're in, what country you live in, or the supervisor you're working with, your experiences and needs as a doctoral student will be completely different. So it's a bit daunting for me to make broad suggestions about what all PhD students should gain from their education or what constitutes a good education in general. That being said, the doctoral student doesn't exist alone in a vacuum. We are all affiliated with universities to some degree, and in theory, the relationship between a researcher and their institution is symbiotic in nature, meaning that just as universities can and should expect to get great research out of their PhD students should expect to get something from the university in return. And I believe that defining what this something is really necessary if we hope to design a doctoral education of high quality. There are, of course, the obvious material costs of starting a PhD that the university should bear: getting office space, a computer, library access, a lab coat, all things that would be a barrier to entry if students were expected to provide them themselves. Supervision during research is also a must, and it's something I think we'll be discussing a lot later. But we should think about how many supervisors a student should have, and what sort of pedagogical or managerial training the university will be obligated to provide those supervisors with in order to ensure the quality of the education. If the goal of a doctoral education is to produce independent researchers, then the universities must provide us with the resources to build the skills that are required for such a role. As a start, universities should offer relevant high-level courses to doctoral students and encourage publication of their thesis work. But networking, teaching, and presentation skills are also necessary to function as a researcher. Opportunities to lecture and to attend international conferences should be integrated into our degree programs and, when possible, bankrolled by someone other than the doctoral student. Lastly, it's my opinion that the most important thing a doctoral student should expect, or rather demand from their university, is support and stability throughout the education. Fear of deportation, discrimination, or destitution will absolutely tank a doctoral student's ability to produce cutting-edge research or to learn new things in general. So when you return to your home institutions, please reflect on what policies are in place to help at-risk doctoral students. Are there ways to report instances of bullying and harassment? Is there support for international students facing visa issues? Can students take sick leave or parental leave without risking a loss of their position? Can they unionize? Is funding stable throughout the education? If the answer to any of these questions is no, then there are improvements that need to be made. A doctoral student can only be of high quality if it can be accessed by everyone. So I look forward to discussing these issues in a good doctoral education during this panel and more throughout this conference. Thank you.
So thank you very much to Hannah. And as we could hear, this is very important. So having the high quality support for early stage researchers who already take the stage to the new career. So they are involved. So what is important from them is having this support, stability, and all these resources that can develop the skills that they need to pursue the PhD journey, but also the next career. So this is very, very important, and we will discuss later about this topic. I will only quickly ask, is there some question from the audience now? No. So now we can follow with the last speaker, which is Nicola Dengo. He's from Eurodoc, and he was involved in, he's also the skills coordinator at the Eurodoc. So he was focusing on doctoral training and also in the connection with the different career paths.
So thank you. So everyone here in this panel, I think, agree that talking about what makes doctoral education in general is very difficult, even overwhelming. I totally agree, but this is a problem that in Eurodoc we are facing over and over again, because we are supposed to collect all the experience across the European borders or across countries and try to make a unified look on it. That is very difficult because depending on which country you go, which university you go, which field you go, doctoral experience is extremely different. So what everyone goes through is very different. And that is not just a problem for us. Very nicely listed by Hannah. That goes from the skill set. So what does it take to do research in 2023? Of course, we're not anymore in a medieval time. We have research professionals who are supposed to drive innovation in the European space, and that requires a number of skills and a number of competences. But you also need to be facilitated on this. We need to have competent supervision. You need to have a good environment to growth. And also, what does it mean to assess your progress over the course of doctoral education? So we have a defense, which is at the end, that stated the fact that you were capable of doing research, so you successfully became more independent researchers. But you also have to assess the progress, and that combined with the fact that you need a diverse skill set is not just doing research. You also have to communicate. So you also have to develop cooperation. You have a lot of things to do. This is getting more and more difficult to really assess. So again, we have to look at those elements. And I think the real important point is all of these elements must be a part of a successful doctoral program. So the I supervise as I was supervised is not working anymore. There is a much more modern and way to go with doctoral education, which has to be established as a bottom quality level that must be consistent across Europe. And right now, it is not really consistent. We still have a lot of problems. We're still receiving so many different complaining because of the lack of coordination across the institutions. So yes, I really think that doctoral education is not a matter of improvising. It's a matter of using good frameworks. It's a matter of using good practices and sharing those and really provide a good quality experience to the doctoral candidates. I will be happy to elaborate more on the details.
Yeah, thank you to Nicola. So he mentioned this important thing. So what is the PhD for? Which is a big question, I think, nowadays, because we are in the transition to open science. We have digital tools, so everything changes. It was 20, 30, 40 years before, the things how we do. And also the things are going too complex with all these things around, and there are other demands. And doctoral candidates it's not having PhD is not anymore this license to teach, but there are different roles to take. And as we heard, not all people could remain in academia, so there is transition to other field. So now we will discuss, or is there any question for Nicola right now? Not. So we will discuss later. So now we will have a discussion. We will have three key topics. We will discuss what is the role of doctoral education. I mean, this question, what it's for, maybe the role in this, how to drive the innovation in the doctoral education. And there are different actors, as I said, institutions, researchers, supervisors, so there could be different perspective. Then we will talk, second topic will be about the ingredients. I mean, what are the key components of doctoral training, doctoral education, because these key components or ingredients should give us the framework, as Nicola mentioned. And at the end, we will see what are the gaps, what we still don't know, what we could improve. So now I would like to start with these questions on what is the goal of doctoral education and what are the needed skills nowadays for independent researchers, and taking account that as we in the title is the timely and relevant doctoral education, so relevant for today's society and also in time manner, because we have some boundary, we are some starting point, ending point, and we cannot only add additional things that so trying to some balance. So what should be the role? What is your opinion on it?
Should I start? Or... Okay. There is one thing that I really want to say, and regards the fact that the conversation has expanded to the topic of transferable skills. What are transferable skills? This kind of answered the questions, what is the doctoral education about is providing some competencies, providing some experience, is making a researcher from R1 to R2 stages with your access levels. And everyone thinks about the expert skills, like you are working in a specific field, you are really working on the edge of that field, pushing the boundaries, creating new knowledge. And that's, of course, is the central part. The thing is, when you move your career outside, especially outside academia, those things are important, but there are some other elements that all of a sudden became so important. The funny thing is that the same elements are important even inside academia. They're just not explicitly considered a lot of time. Just to note, in reinventing the wheel, I mean, this is a document that we are developing. We have developed a framework for transferable skills. So you will find something that you probably do on your daily basis if you are involved also in academia, which is communication. You need to talk to people about your research, and you need to be aware of the audience, and you need to tailor your discussion depending on who's listening. If you imagine going outside in any sort of company or in every possible way, you will have to do that probably. You have managing data and information. Just doing research and background research is very important, and that's unavoidably a very high level skill that you can bring whenever you go. The ability to cooperate with others, like the idea of a research as a loner genius doing some incredible things is really outdated, and nowadays we are talking more and more about cooperation. We are moving assessment towards really valuing cooperation, and that is important in every possible venue you end up at the end of a doctoral program. But even teaching, supervise others, like all these elements are extremely valuable and are fundamental parts of what growing as a researcher and doing your PhD is. And the problem is, most of research, doctor candidates are not even aware of this and needs to be aware of this to make a case of themselves and to reflect on their own careers and their own strong point and weak points within their professionalization. And secondly, this has a deep impact in how doctor schools are structured, because we came from this model of supervision when the supervisor is bringing everything, but we have to question if with all these elements, maybe having some additional experts coming in and providing really good education in some specific points could be helpful. I think, of course, it is. And just to finish, a very important point, this is not something that we are adding on top of doctoral education. This was always there from the start. We're just realizing how important it can be, specifically if we want to develop researchers' career outside academia. To just bring the value of a PhD in a clearer way to also people that may not be as familiar as we are to the content and the value of a PhD.
Is there any comment of our panelists would like to reflect on what was defining for? Hear me, sorry. So yeah. So Alexandra, or please even later, if you will have any questions, just raise your hand and we will give you a floor.
No, thank you very much. And as I understand, we have really now this more general discussion. So I want just to add what has been said, a more general reflection about also this debate about what is the output of a doctoral of a doctorate. And I mean, you mentioned before that, for instance, increased new stakeholders like funders and so on. And of course, there has been in the last decades also new logics within academia. One is, of course, this project logic, that whatever we do, we think about, oh, okay, this is a project. So if you have a project, you say, okay, what are the deliverables? What are the steps you have to do, input, output? And I'm just wondering if we should not reflect if this is how we want the doctorate to be. So to what degree we should, and I understand that a lot in academia is framed around project, and this makes a lot of sense, especially when as soon as you have a timeline, you will also think there is a beginning and an end. But I'm not sure if we should always, if we should maybe have a bit a critical approach to this thinking, seeing the doctorate as a project which leads from A to B, because by doing a doctorate, you are part of the academic community. So you are not a project which enters and then you leave, you are part of it. And this is not to say that we should not think, okay, what comes out or what are the inputs, but we should really, yes, to think maybe more when we speak about the timely doctoral education, more the overall academia and what it means today to also have an academic identity as a doctoral candidate. And also, you meant, Nicola, the question of the research profession. And I think this is definitely one kind of, and I don't want to say output, but one aim to provide, to train people to become research professionals. But of course, you can have all kind of stuff after the doctorate. And at the end, probably what the doctorate makes it special is that during the doctorate, you produce already a lot of important elements, like, for instance, your doctoral research, which you spend many years of it. And even if you leave academia, you will always have academia as part of you. So I would say providing academics independently, if you are staying in academia or not, but providing people who understand what is the idea of academic thinking, who have had this experience and can translate it to society, also remains important. And this leads, and Hannah, you said it very well about this diversity and the different needs we have in Europe. And so therefore we need to be aware of that we cannot answer all the question, or we cannot provide a framework, one fits it all framework, because the needs are extremely differently. And the way, what the role of institution here can be is, and this has already been mentioned by Johanna and others, we need to have the mechanism in place. If a problem comes up, if there is an issue, then doctoral candidate gets a place to get there. So it's maybe less to have already systems in place for everybody that already structures everything. But if you have an issue with your supervisors, and this is, I would say, happening actually in all institutions nowadays, or in the majority, in the great majority, to have structures who can support them. So we should more think of making the doctorate as open as possible, as diverse as possible, while at the same time establishing structures which can deal with issues whenever they come up.
Mhm.
Okay, so the goals of doctoral education. I mean, of course, it's really important to create these independent researchers, but it's much wider. It's a much wider mission, I think. And as I said before, it has to do with the formation of scholars who can do lots of things, not just doing research, but being innovators and take part in the societal discussions and so on. Be the critical voice in the society. I think that is really important. But as you point out these transferable skills in such a nice way, I would like to just address one more thing. I think that sometimes, not least because of funding agencies and supervisors who want the research being done, and doctoral students who want a great thesis, the project logic might also lead to a very narrow view on the discipline. So I would advocate for a broader disciplinary knowledge. I think that is really important to learn how you think within the discipline. I mean, with the project logic, you do courses that helps you with your research. You do the things that you're good at, because then you are the best person in the research group who can provide this. But if you have more an educational logic, you would do courses that makes you a broader academic, someone who knows a lot of things and who have disciplinary insights in another way. And you also try to do things within your research that you're not good at, that you need to learn through your research. So if you're already good at doing all the experiments, you might focus on writing. And if you have several doctoral students in the same group, it might be the opposite if you have the project logic. So you're good at the experiments, do them. You're good at writing, do that. And so I think that to think about how we manage to get the broad disciplinary knowledge is one of the really important things. And there you have all the seminars within the departments and the research groups and so on that might help you to widen the perspectives. The discussions between doctoral students, but also between many senior staff, not just the supervisor. And so that is just because you have already talked about the really very important part of the transferable skills and to learn how to think in a different way and communicate and so on.
Yes, so I don't think I can say anything better than Nicola said. He said, I think, all my points. And you also brought up a very good point about the need for a doctoral education to sort of broaden one's education, to not just have someone hyper focus on one point, but to hit their weak spots and improve upon them. So for me, I would say that the ultimate goal of a doctoral education is to place the student in a better position than they were in before they started, by opening up new jobs to them, by, giving them so many networking opportunities that they know new people and they're able to go out there and share their ideas and to create new knowledge that didn't exist for humanity before, based on gaps that they saw because they knew those gaps existed. Yeah, I think you guys did a really great job of summarizing everything. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, there is. Yeah, would you like to have comment, Nicola? Yeah, of course.
Sorry for this. No, because I super agree on the problems that comes with the project logic. And in my opinions, is one of the reasons that we're losing the focus on the person. And considering a PhD candidate as a way to carry on that specific project creates so many problems. Some of them are more on the broader aspects, like creating an actual good critical thinker that actually have a nice overview on the field. But some other are really related to the daily practices. Like if everything is on a project, good luck if the relationship with the supervisor doesn't work. That is a deal breaker. In case the person is the center, then you can resolve it, because the supervisor is another way. It can be switched. If the center is the project, then there's no way to resolve the situation. So I just say that I totally agree with that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Is there, there is a question from Martin, Andra. We have this.
Oh. I'm really bad in throwing. You understand?
Hello. Very interesting discussion. Nicola raised a question, 3 or 5 years, and I'd like all of you to elaborate on 3 or 5 years, because 3 years, clearly it's going to be project, narrow education, and 5 years allows more time to broaden your view. But of course, it raises a question of funding. And it also indirectly raises the question of the Bologna process, because the Bologna process, the standard supposed for the doctorate, apart from the master's, is 3 years. It's supposed to be 3 years. Actually, the Bologna process was called 358, right, originally. And this is a limitation. For instance, in France, the normal funding for a doctorate is 3 years. And beyond that, you have to find various kinds of solutions. So it probably varies a lot from one country to the other. And also it raises the question of how is the European model competitive on the world arena? I'm throwing the ball back to you.
Well, in Sweden, we have this middle way and 4 years. So that could be a sort of easy way out on your question. I think that 3 years is would be a bit short, but it might be because of my experience here that 4 years plus extra time because you normally teach, and that is not included in these 4 years. But it also depends on what comes next. So of course you can have 3 years and then you have possibilities to go on and become this independent researchers and so on. But I think a narrow limit might be forcing even more towards this project logic, where you really do need to do the safe research, where you need, where you know that you can have the results that you need for the doctorate, and that might be problematic, I think. So, yeah.
Yes, thank you very much. Well, well, as researchers, scientists, scholars, we know about the importance of empirical knowledge. And when we look how the situation is, if there is not a very strict legal obligation, in general, doctorate takes 4 years. So this is question to acknowledge how long it is. And then often it's also what we should not forget, we speak about full-time equivalent or not, because some of you come from countries where we know maybe 70–80% of doctoral candidates works besides. So then this 4 years, it's 4 years, 50%. So is it then 8 years of your life? So we should, when we talk about funding, there is an issue, yes, that this idea 3-year funding for doctorate, we know from a lot of survey that it's probably 4 years. And this is what I said. I think you, Martin, also talked about funding yesterday. We really need to discuss the length, but this should not lead on the expenses on the number of doctorates you can have, because we need both. We need a realistic acknowledgement of the duration, but this should not be, okay, you take longer and so we will have less. And I also agree that, of course, this short term makes this project logic even strong. And we should not forget, it's not only about discussing to what degree the doctorate should be part of a project, but to what degree we should understand the doctorate itself as a project. And I think we agree here that it should be more. So it should have the time for failing, for instance, for making experiments. And what we also know when we speak about collaboration with non-university partners, it takes time. When we speak about internationalization, and if it's not about helicopter research where you fly in, you take 3 weeks, you research in some other part of the world, and then you come back. Also, this takes time. So we also need here to acknowledge, if we want to be more international, if we want to have mobility, this also takes time. But again, some people also for their own life planning are really interested to be fast for any reason. Others have more time. So we also here need to have flexibility and reflect to what degree very strict deadlines are fit for purpose, and to what degree we need to think, okay, it's good to have a certain orientations, but then to have a certain flexibility.
Thank you. Is there any other question from?
I have.
Yes, I think he was before.
Yeah. Yeah.
Thanks a lot for a very interesting discussion. I was thinking if you can comment a little bit about how different the institutions are for PhD students across Europe with terms to publication requirements. Like many countries do not have this requirement for PhD students to publish in the 3 years. Also teaching. In Sweden, it's important that PhD students are also involved in teaching, and also that they publish during their PhD studies. So in your opinion, what do you think how important is it to bring neutrality in this sense throughout all the universities in Europe? And also, if somebody wants to still publish and teach during their time in the countries where it is not required, how can they approach this issue?
I'm not the expert on the differences. I've read about it, but you probably know more. But I would also like to point out another type of difference than between countries, and that is the difference between disciplines. Even in Sweden, you don't have you don't have to publish in some areas, but in other areas it's fundamental. You have to have accepted at least articles. So the difference between disciplines might be as big as the difference between countries, and that is what you see in research. Although there are also big differences between countries when it comes to, for example, the demands of publications, but also how you do the defense and many other things. I think that there are good reasons for trying to make it a bit more similar, but that we also need to acknowledge the differences, and maybe more the differences and needs from different disciplines than the differences between countries. But that is just my opinion.
Should I quickly? Yes. Well, when we talk, and this is really a strength of Europe, is this diversity. So when we look into more in details, we have, of course, huge diversities. For instance, 3/4 of the doctorates are of university have doctoral programs. Then half of it has centralized doctoral schools. So many have both. We have a bit diversity even in practices, how doctoral education work. We have the traditional doctorates. Mostly we have some special doctorates in the arts. Now increasingly postdocs became connected to doctoral schools. We have, and I know Eurodoc is working a lot on this, on different also status of, it's different if you are employed for 3 years, or if you have a student status, or if your funding comes from mix of sources. Here we have also legislative differences, but also about funding which is available. We have very different activities. So some doctorates, for instance, teaching. So in some countries, it's nearly the law obliged to teach. In others, there is not that culture. Again, I would not say, and it would not be my role or as UACD now to judge this is the good and the bad, because again, as was said before, people on the ground in the context know best what it is. And this is the same for the disciplines. But again, it's important also to understand there are some basic commonality already. On one hand is, as already mentioned, the base of research. So it's not, yes, it is the base of the doctorate. It is not necessarily the only outcome or the whatever, but it's the base. The second is to understand this idea of a transition phase, that the doctorate is a transition phase. It's not a project per se, but it's a phase where you transit from, you start as a student or you finish your studies, and at the end you are these independent researchers. The third is this idea that universities have responsibilities. So 15 years ago, or now nearly 20, about 20% of institutions in Europe had this kind of structured doctoral education. Now we are 97%. So nearly every university has a structured approach. Again, could be extremely diverse. And also the fourth is, and this was already mentioned, to understand the importance of supervision. Of course, here we have also the differences that some countries, again, can also be connected to legal, have some requirements, who can supervise or not. But what we see at the moment is that especially younger supervisors, postdoc, are usually really interested to learn. So we have here actually quite positive development. So to summarize this, there is a huge difference, but we should not forget that we have quite strong commonalities. And this leads what also Martin asked, compared to other world regions. Of course, actually doctorate is relatively fast connected to other countries, but what we have here is really a diversity, for instance, connected to a culture where it's quite normal that you can transfer to other sector, which is not everywhere in the world. So we could also, I would say, be quite proud what we have here as developed in the last 20 years in having a doctorate which is diverse, which focuses really on both on the person itself, but also values the contribution doctoral candidates do to the world, to the research community, and also has developed support structures.
Yeah. Would you like to comment?
And just one thing I'd like to add to get back to your original question is if a doctoral student wishes to teach, but is not contractually obligated to teach, then I think it's very important that we stress that they should be able to teach and that teaching should not detract from their research. They shouldn't be penalized for choosing to teach. In Sweden, for example, every hour that I teach, I don't have to teach, I choose to teach, but every hour that I teach is then added as an hour to the end of my PhD. So I never lose any research time. My research time is prolonged and the funding is there. The university pays me separately for teaching than it does for my research. And I think that is very important. And if possible, then a similar system should be instituted if it can be for those students who wish to teach, but don't have to.
So thank you, Hannah. And now we have a question. And after Pil question, I would like to go to another thematic question that we said about the ingredients.
So this is a little bit of a reflection and a question in the end. So also to follow up on Martin on how this is a doctorate 3 years, or is it 5 years? And in Sweden it is 4 years. It requires 240 credits formally to apply for the PhD program. This is how Sweden. This is how it fits into the Bologna process. Many has more. Most has a master's degree. But what is really crucial, and Hannah also pointed out, is that everything we do in Sweden that is not fundamentally a part of the education, meaning teaching and research, we are prolonged for. We are extended. Our contracts are extended when we teach. Our contracts are extended. Our full-time contracts are extended when we teach. And there is no law of nature that says that you can't be both employed and a student. Sweden is a very good example that you can have both employment conditions and student status. Employment conditions is my working conditions. Student status is my representational rights in the university, in the governmental string of the university. But my question is tied to the funding, because it becomes sometimes unclear. It becomes a little, when we advocate so strongly for employment conditions in Eurodoc, in the NAs of Eurodoc, it's because with employment conditions comes equal opportunities. That's what allow students from a non-academic background, from other social situations, to pursue an academic career. If we can't provide that, then many are actually excluded at the entrance door because they can't afford that precarity. And this is one of the great, you still see big discrepancies in the Swedish doctoral education from that. But it's one of the great strengths which came with the employment condition is also that the graduation percentage increased in Sweden, that more people graduated. So I would like the panelists' reflections on some of these topics like that, like to also maybe think about what is it that makes doctoral education accessible for a diverse group, for a diverse student body. Thank you.
Yeah, so who will be the first? Who would like an idea on the question of Pil?
I think I could add on that maybe.
Yeah.
I think Pil touched on a very sensitive issue, which is the fact that it is not admissible that you must capable of affording your own PhD, otherwise you are cut out. Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. And we had, just want to state that we had multiple very recent occurrences of this sort of situation. And we saw that happening, for example, in one university website where they were overly honest and saying that the salary was below the standard that you require to live in the city. So you were supposed to use your own resources during the PhD. I mean, there was probably a mistake to actually say that in the website. But we had some countries where by design, the salary was very, very low, and it was a sort of a race of survival, and just a few people were supposed to actually reach the end. And that creates so much inequalities, because of course, if you have a very privileged background, if you have all the resources in the world, then you can make it, otherwise you're out. And this is especially true if you want to make academia a decent place, a decent working environment, if you want to accommodate having that kind of job and a good life quality, and maybe having a family and all that. I mean, that have to be, you have to have compatible, yeah, that must be a possibility. It cannot be just a lifetime sacrifice that you go through.
Yes, we probably, everybody here will agree, and everybody who is into this field, that you need life sustenance support when you do a doctorate where you can live off it. Otherwise, it's completely not sustainable. We all agree. Again, I'm not sure if this is only linked to a legal status of the doctoral candidate. What we have been working a lot, actually, or I mean, we started last year, for instance, in our annual meeting, is, for instance, the question of first generation doctoral candidates. And what we have seen here, and when we organized actually this conference last year, we thought there is not a lot of research actually. So we really need to work more on it, but there are increased activities in many institutions who understand that increasing the access of doctoral education, and we need to accept that there is an inequality who does the doctorate, and it's not only because of the funding itself. What we know, it has also to be that when you are coming from a working class background, you have already a master, you have been like 15 years in a school study context, and they must say, yes, I'm doing 4 years more a doctorate, and maybe your parents or friend ask you, but why don't you go to work? And then you need to explain, well, doing a doctorate is pretty hard work. So maybe you need to be then capacitated to understand why this is a work. You need peers and people you work with. So I would say about this really important question is, it's, of course, we all agree there need to be a sustenance for the doctorate. And at the same time, it's really important to think more, how can we attract first generations, even though you can also not be first generation and have financial issues, but how we can establish a culture and capacitate people. And for this, I would say universities are really increasing to work on that.
Mm-hmm. Can I add that it has, of course, to do with equity and first generation and so on, but it also has to do with, I mean, the worth in the society, within academia and in the society as a whole. We need to be able to give doctoral education to those who are best suited for that. And if they need to put in their own money, we might exclude really important persons. So because of them, of course, and the working environment and all that, but also actually for the society and academia itself.
I would like to add that I am one of those first generation students. So without my funding, I would not be sitting before you today. I would be working my butt off somewhere in the United States trying to pay off my student loans. But I want to echo what you said, that more research is needed about the sort of supports besides financial support for first generation students, because so often we feel that like there is this secret boys club where everyone else in the department has parents with PhDs and they know so much that we don't know. The first time I met someone with a PhD, I was 18 years old meeting my college professors. Like, it is wild sometimes, the discrepancies in what people just grew up with taking for granted and what I need to find out, and that isn't written down anywhere. So I would really like to stress that we do need more research, and I thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah. So there is not enough time. We are almost at the end of our session, but at least I would mention these ingredients or what we heard. So what is important role to prepare of doctoral education to prepare the individuals for their journey to that they can contribute to the society, to drive the innovation, also to increase knowledge, and how to transmit, communicate with others. So communication skills are very important. So communicate with different actors, communicate the results, and especially nowadays within the digital environment, we have other tools how to communicate. Then what was also mentioned is cooperation. It's very important. So how to cooperate, how to work together, because within the team we can achieve more, and also how to supervise maybe others. So even if doctoral candidates are in the training process of research, they can even supervise, because this will be their role. And then we have this time limited doctoral journey. So there could be the project-based approach, and we have limited resources for it. And beginning, the idea was really to have 3 years of PhD, 3 or 4 years. So we have to see what is realistic for these 3-4 years to deliver these things. The importance of transferable skills, but we need also to think in which stage we should deliver the transferable skills. And we need to think what is the framework. We have the starting point, we have the end point. So there should be some kind of onboarding with information, some midterm evaluation, and outboarding, prepare the people outside. So regarding the diversity that we have, it can be strength, but on other hand, we need some framework. And this, I think, would be these ingredients. What will be the ingredients of the good quality doctoral education? It doesn't mean that you need to stick all the things, because if you would like to teach, maybe you will devote to the teaching. If someone is working with the companies, so we need to think what could be this great framework, and what components of this framework could be. For example, working condition, length of the PhD, number of publication or outputs for different discipline, what is needed. We have mobility, we have international mobility, intersectoral, interdisciplinary. So this is something we think I could think about how to frame this framework to support the diversity. So thank you very much to all of you, and especially to our panelists, and we will continue the discussion during our breaks, and looking forward to the next session. Thank you very much.
So thank you, everyone. We are a little bit late, but you have 5 minutes